Pope Francis has called for an investigation to determine if Israel's continued assault on Gaza constitutes genocide. Now, that's according to comments he made in a book that's set to be released tomorrow. In one excerpt published this past Sunday, Pope Francis said, quote, according to some experts, what is happening in Gaza has the characteristics of a genocide. That's what Pope Francis says. He's not trying to be overtly political, but he's trying to point out something. Now, previously, before this, the Pope had already been condemning what was happening. He called the attacks immoral and disproportionate. Immoral and disproportionate. But he still offered some support for Israel. I think as a Pope, it's kind of hard to not offer support for everybody who's been victimized or harmed, anyone who's been on the victim side of violence. The Pope is going to say something. But the Pope never went past that point. The Pope never openly called for an investigation to see if Israel's actions were actually a violation of international law or humanitarian law, at least not until now. This tells you something. The Pope has had enough. The Pope is patient. The Pope don't want to wade into murky political waters. The Pope wants to be above the fray. But it's hard to be above the fray. It's hard to call yourself a moral agent of the world. It's hard to be a leader. It's hard for all those things to go together, to jive and gel together, if you are silent in the face of a genocide. The Pope is being soft here. He's being kind here. And maybe not. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. He could actually be saying, I don't know if it's a genocide. I just know it's bad. But I suspect he already knows it's a genocide. It meets the legal standard. I'm sure he talked to his advisors before he said it. So why is the Pope doing this? Well, the Pope is trying to muster popular sentiment. He's trying to galvanize public support to stop the genocide in Gaza. Salute to the Pope for using his power for that purpose. Now, of course, Israel responded because that's what they do. That's what all nations do. They respond. You call the U.S. complicit in something, you better believe the U.S. ambassador is going to say something, or the Secretary of State, or the press secretary, or the president. It just depends on what the topic is. But somebody's going to say something. Well, in Israel, their ambassador to the Vatican spoke up. And the Israeli ambassador to the Vatican stood up and said what? He said, I'm about to clown. He disagreed with the Pope. He criticized the Pope's remarks. He specifically issued a statement that reads, in part, Israel has exercised its right to self-defense, or right of self-defense, against attempts from 7 different fronts to kill its citizens. Any attempt to call it by any other name is singling out the Jewish state. So no surprises there from the Israeli ambassador to the Vatican. First, they're framing all of Israel's actions as self-defense. By that argument, once somebody does something to you, you can literally attack them for the next 100 years and it would be self-defense. But that also, just to be clear, I'm not conceding that the Palestinians were the initial actors. October 7th is not the beginning of history, and it's not the beginning of the struggle over Israel and Palestine. An occupation itself is an act of violence. It's a provocation. It's an act of ongoing state violence. It's an act of ongoing illegality. And people who are occupied always have a right to self-defense. They always have a right to engage in violent resistance. And in a country that is engaged in said military occupation does not have a right to defend itself. Now, what happened on October 7th is more complicated because some of it happened on Israeli shores, inside of Israel's technically undeclared borders. I hear that. But that doesn't give Israel a right to engage in indiscriminate and disproportionate force ad infinitum. And that seems to be what Israel is doing. And to say that they're singling out the Jewish state is ridiculous. The Pope has called out every nation, not every nation, but called out countless, maybe not countless, you can count them, but the Pope has called out a lot of nations that have done a lot of stuff. And the global community has called out a lot of nations that have done a lot of stuff. Not enough. Too much of it the global south, too much of it Africa. But the fact of the matter is Israel's not being singled out. Israel's engaged in an act that has been condemned when other nations did it. And in fact, the reason why Israel's getting so much smoke right now, the reason that Israel's the subject of so much scrutiny and criticism is because Israel's engaged in one of the most gross, indefensible, and disproportionate acts of violence of the moment, of the modern era, certainly in the 21st century. So yeah, Israel's getting a lot more attention than other countries because Israel's doing a lot more than most other countries. So that is that. But we'll keep track of it. We'll pay attention to the Pope, and we will hope that the Pope will make an impact. I'm not optimistic, but as the old blues singers say, I remain full of hope.